Get us going. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are in hot crop season. It's time for hot crops. We have our instructor here tonight with us, Akello. He's going to take you through hot crops and tell you how to take care of your hot crops. So I hope you are ready. Got your notebooks out. I want you to go ahead and check out the screen we have here. We know these classes are free, but if you feel so compelled to leave a donation, we do accept those as well. So get ready, take a look at our other screens, learn some things about Keep Growing Detroit and the Garden Resource Program if you're not a member yet. If you have questions during tonight's class, you can leave those in the chat, and there will be some Q&A sessions, and I will make sure Akello gets your question. So if you all are ready, let's give it over to Akello. All right, go ahead, Akello.
All right, thank you, Naja, and hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We'll be discussing caring for hot crops, so we'll be going over the different type of hot crops that we have in our garden resource program distribution, talking about how to care for them, how to plant them, how to do soil prep, how to harvest them, how to do pest management. So we have a lot planned for you all today. And so to get started, I'm just gonna start about talking about all the plants that we have. And if you don't know me, my name is Akello. I'm the farm manager for Keep Growing Detroit. I manage the transfer and production and the seed procurement for the Garden Resource Program, and also the planting and the maintenance of our farm, our KGD farm. So I'm just going to pull up, if I remember how to screen share, I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint. Let's see. All right. And so just to go over the plants that you all will be receiving, well, I guess we can also briefly just touch on our co-crops. So hopefully you all have received and pick up your co-crops from April and gotten those in and so on. I think we can open it up at the end of it to talk about any co-crop questions too at the end of the presentation, just since we have the opportunity and so on. But we'll be mainly focusing on our hot crops that we're going to be getting. So we got some transplants and seeds, and right now we're looking at the family plan your garden. So you'll see what's available for a family to choose. We have peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers, squashes, summer and winter squashes, and then beans, flowers, and so on. So a very diverse range of crops to choose from and also manage and grow and harvest from as well. So I'll be breaking these up, like we have multiple tomatoes, we have multiple peppers and eggplants and so on. And so I'll be treating these all like a group. So all these crops, they have similar growing practices and recommendations. And so I'll be treating them as a whole, but there are some smaller nuances and like one-offs that are just in their own family, like okra, which we'll be talking about individually as well. And always feel free to, when we do have our question portion, feel free to ask about particular crops and so on as we go through. And before I get into things, I just want to also point out some of the resources that we have for you all ready and available. And this right here is just the community crops that we'll be giving out very soon. And I just want to pull the planting instructions. Let me see if we have the crop. My apologies all. Here we go. So we also, like we built for the co-crop production, we have individual planting instructions for each crop already available for you all on our website. You can just go to the Keep Growing Detroit website here, go to the Garden Research Program under Grow, and then down below if it loads for me again. We'll find the hot crop instructions, you'll see cold crop instructions and so on. So we really touch on like the main things that you need to know to get your plants started correctly. So you'll find information on hardening off your transplants, how to plant them, how to maintain them when you first get them in, and also to check for insects and so on when you pick up your plants. And then you'll find a individual description of how to plant your plants at their recommended spacing, the growing tips for them. You'll also find the variety of those plants as well, because there's some nuances between the varieties of plants that you may need to know. And so on. So we have pretty much all the plants that we do have all the plants that we are distributing this year. All right, and then there's just more information here. And so what I'll be doing is building off of this information here and packaging it for you all so that it's nicely and easily digestible for you. All right, and really how I'm going to build this, I guess this class is more conversational with Naja's help, and we'll hop into the main thing. So I'll go back to our list of plants here. And so an overview of the crops. So as I mentioned, we have tomatoes, peppers. We even have malokia, which is a Egyptian spinach as a quick name for that. Okra, summer squash, eggplants, winter squash, onions, potatoes, and herbs that you will be receiving in various amounts in this distribution. So again, I'll be breaking these up into categories and so on. But as we're moving into the next season, so we in our previous class talked about a lot about the conditions that come in April, and now we're in May. And so that's important because for our zone, our growing zone here in Michigan, we're a 5A or 5B, but that period means that our last frost should be experienced sometime between May 1st and May 31st. So that means that the temperature might drop down below 30 degrees or so one of these nights. And what that means for our hot crops, well, it's in the name, right? We have hot crops. They like it when it's hot. And so we want to make sure that it's not going to be too cold or the conditions outside are going to be too cold for them to grow. And so, and if we do plant our plants outside when it's too cold, like they're not built to handle the cooler temperatures. A lot of these crops are indigenous to warmer climates and so on. And so the way that we're planting them here, we're treating them as annuals basically, because they don't overwinter. Annual meaning that they just grow one year and then if they don't reseed, they won't grow back because the entire plant dies out. And so we have to be mindful of when we plant our plants outside. And so looking at the weather right now, we've had some days that have been around, well, at least so far it's been around 50 degrees at night. That's what you want to pay attention to, not so much when it's hot outside or such. It's just an illusion. It can change. Well, it literally changes every day. But you want to pay attention to those night temperatures because that's when it gets cold. And so you might be experiencing some nights around 40 or so coming next week. So once you get your transplants, our distribution start Monday, we have to pick up for people to come out. And so I highly recommend that you take a little break between that time of that Monday. Don't hop out there and plant your plants immediately unless you feel comfortable doing so, but take that time to harden off your plants. Hardening off meaning that you slowly introduce them to the outside elements. And that can look like you taking your plants from inside during the day. If it's like not super rainy, it's nice and sunny and warm outside, put them outside, leave them on your porch and so make sure that you water them well before you leave them to do what you do. And then at night you bring them in, water them again, check on them, and then you put them back inside. Don't let them stay outside at night. We are slowly introducing our plants to be outside. So once you have your plants properly hardened off, and we'll be doing, two birds, one stone with that. We'll be hardening off our plants, and we'll also not be planting them when it's going to get cold next week. And so by the week after that, your plants will be ready for planting. They'll be nice and hardened off, very hardy. And the reason why we harden them off is just so that they don't experience shock. So these transplants are just coming out of a greenhouse. They're like little babies, and they're not very experienced in the world. And so we need to slowly introduce them to that. And we just put them outside. They might not figure things out. They might not know what to do, what class to pick in college or whatnot. And so we just need to slowly introduce them into the new element. And so that's basically what hardening off is. And that basically saves you some time. Ultimately, it saves you time in getting your plant more established into the ground. And so main thing that we want to look out for is the temperature at night, making sure that we're not planting our plants when it's too cold. And as a farmer, I don't think we're going to experience another frost where it gets below like 30 or so, at least in my own personal estimation of how the weather's trending right now. I think we might stay somewhere not too low before, below 40 or so on, and then we definitely get back up once January hits. So make sure that your plants are very well protected before you put them out. And so also another thing I want to mention, we have transplants, which, they have their own conditions and so on. But we also need to think about our seeds too. And so there's the air temperature, and then there's the ground temperature. The ground temperature is going to be a little bit cooler for your seeds to grow in. And many of the packages that we have for our hot crop transplants, many of them will say plant when soil temperature degrees are around 70 or so. And so it might be 70 right now when you're outside feeling the sun and all that, but you take all that away, what's the temperature of that soil? Soil absorbs heat differently, and so it's normally cooler and so on. And so when you go out and plant your plants, what I recommend, or plant your seeds, your plants are a little bit different. They are a little bit more hardier than your seeds. So their requirements, they're already germinated. They're already bigger plants. They can just, go out at a different time frame than your seeds. But what I recommend for your seeds is that you plant those in the later half of May when it's a lot warmer. So don't go out there and plant them that day because you don't have to, that day that you get them. Don't plant them that week because they don't have to be hardened off, but you might see that your plants are germinating a little bit slower because it's not warm enough within that soil temperature. And so just give them a little bit of time to wait for it to warm up some more so that you can get that consistent germination rate and that consistent and a higher germination as well. All right. And you want to make sure that ultimately that your plants are past the danger of frost, which for us, unless we get, some Michigan weather, should be ending at the end of this month, okay? All right, and also pay attention to the forecast too, as you're planting your plants and getting them out there. Weather changes all the time, as we know. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions about prepping conditions and so on. And I also want to note that we will be talking about, bed prep, harvesting, and so on in other portions of the class. So any questions on that? Sorry, Naja, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Akello. But no, I was asking, like, if is this anyone's first time, planting hot crops? Do you have any questions in regards to that? Are you comfortable getting started?
Yeah, this is my first time ever having a garden,
Okay,
and
who is this speaking?
my name is Stacy.
Okay, hey Stacy.
I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm still trying to figure out where to put them. And I know there's a compost that we're supposed to pick up, but they didn't have it at the Orleans Street farm. And so I'm not even quite sure where to go get the mulch or whatever it is that you pick up to mix with the soil, but I have the soil and I have the spot and I'm ready to go. I'm a little bit, hesitant to kill everything off before I get started.
So you're looking for a resource. So we have those resources, the wood chips, stakes, compost, are available at our resource hub. So the KGD farm isn't a resource hub for those materials. That's where we prep our wood chip stakes, and then the compost that's theirs for the farm. But for the greater garden resource program membership, you can find those resources that are hubs. So I'm forgetting the name. Well, I know the Brightmoor Community Garden area, that's where one is. That's on Hinkle and somewhere close to the Telegraph. And we can find those exact ones for you. And I can also email you our resource manager's location. And then the other farm, it's right in trying to remember the name of this one. It's blinking on me.
We have one on Oakland Avenue too, at the Oakland Farm.
Yeah.
That's a hub. So yeah, each neighborhood will have like different hubs. When you look on the list, it'll show you like which one is in your neighborhood too.
Is there one on the east side?
Yes.
Georgia Street Community Collective. That one's on Gratiot and right by Gratiot in 94.
Can I chime in? This is Marguerite. I recently went for the first time to the Georgia Street Collective, and Mark, who's over that, was really helpful. And there's a shovel there, but remember to take your buckets.
Oh yes. Need your buckets.
Yeah, but he's very helpful. You can call him and he'll explain where it is, right near Gratiot and Van Dyke on
Mhm.
Georgia. But he lives right across the street from where the compost and the mulch is.
Mhm.
Okay. And you said you're gonna send that to us, or you already did, or it's on the email? I didn't hear what.
Well, that's on the you can if it's for all the garden resource members. So if you go onto the website, you can access all that, and there's a list of all the locations.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Now, do you? I'll get your email. Stacy, send me your email in the messenger, and I can send you that link.
Okay, I see host and I see a kilo.
I am the host, or you can
Okay.
send it to Akello. So either one of us will get it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm Diana.
Hi, Diana.
Hi. My question was, I don't know where I got this from, but after planting everything, I put some straw on top. Is that okay to do, or should I not have done that?
That's okay to do depending on for plants like
You're breaking up a little bit, Akello.
up a little bit.
Yeah.
How about now? Good.
Yes.
All right, thank you. I would recommend, well, first off, Diana, what
Mhm.
plants did you?
I can't hear you.
What plants did you mulch?
Actually, everything's in there now. Plus my seeds, and it's a raised bed, by the way.
Okay. Well, it's okay to mulch your transplants. And then with the seeds, however, those ones might still need some access to sunlight and so on.
They might what?
They might need access to sunlight.
But right now they haven't sprouted, so once they
And
sprout, remove the straw, I mean.
well, also, well, you can do that as well, but if they germinate while they're under the straw, when you don't see them, they might hit that barrier and they might start to stretch and you might impede their growth. And so what I recommend is that you remove that straw from them until they germinate. And so you want to let
Okay.
them get a little bit bigger and more, supportive of themselves before you put that straw around them, and then you can put that straw around your.
Okay. Okay,
Right? Thank you.
thank you.
All right. Do we have any more questions before we?
I do. My name is Eileen, and I
Hi.
just want to, hi, could you tell me again what zone we're in? Because every time I check, everything it always says, well, for my zip code, it says 6B. So it's just Michigan in general is 5, or?
Well, it's Michigan is very diverse zone
Okay.
wise, so
All right. Thank you.
but generally we're like a 5B, 5A. But what's important to remember, forget the term of that, but we will experience our last frost between May 31st, or excuse me, between May 1st and May 31st, and then we'll experience our first frost October 1st between October 31st. And so that's basically our growing season, right? That's all you need to know for us. Right.
Excuse me. All right. If there's no more questions, we're going to jump into the next segment of the class. All
All
right.
right.
Get on.
Let's do some soil prep. And I do highly recommend that you all go back and watch our cold crop preparation class. It's very similar to this. I went into depth about soil prep as well. And I highly recommend, especially if you've gotten your cold crops planted as well, and want to make sure that you've gotten those off to a good start. But soil prep, we just want to make sure that the soil that we're planting our plants in is soil that will help our plants grow into healthy, vigorous plants. And so to do that, we have to first, analyze our soil. And so with the Keep Growing Detroit, with your Garden Resource Program membership, we, cover the cost of a soil test. And so a 30 by 30 area soil test is available to you all to get done. And what I always recommend is that we just find out first before we start to make decisions about the soil that we're going to do. And in that, you'll find out the chemical balance of your soil, the pH, and so on. And you'll be able to know what you're starting with, the organic matter that's available, and whatnot. And so that's the chemical side of your soil. And then we also have the physical side of your soil that we want to make sure that we address too. So we want to make sure that the soil that you're growing in is well draining, nice and fluffy. And that's because the plants that we're planting have evolved to grow in soils that are very nice and malleable, easy for root systems to develop in, and so on. A lot of these plants were originally planted around river streams and so on. And so we want to try and mimic that as much as possible. We don't want to put it in a place where it's too rocky or too dry or too clay. And we want to put it in a place where water can flow through easily and air can get to plant roots and so on. And so when you come in and do your soil prep, just make sure you can simply do this by, we'll talk about adding compost, but you can add some compost, flip it, incorporate it into your plants. That's an easy way to, adding compost is the easy way to amend your soils without having to, get into the calculus of figuring out what amendments and amounts to add. Compost does so many things for our soil. It's really a nice and easy way to amend your soils. And as a farmer, I'm always looking for easy and simple ways to get my plants what they need. And so once you take your compost, add it to your soil, incorporate it. You can use a shovel or a broad fork or something. You just want to mix it in, flip it, turn it, make sure that it's nice and fluffy, broken up for the plants that are going to be, and also aerated and broken up for your plants that you're going to be planting in there soon. And then from there, what I recommend, soil, nature doesn't like to be uncovered. And so you always see weeds grow on top of bare soils and so on. That's a natural reaction. That's nature protecting itself from the sun, from erosion, and so on. And so we want to try and mimic that as much as possible. It's going to help our plants grow even better. So I highly recommend that we cover our plants, cover our soil, excuse me, with straw, wood chips, leaves, or so on, just to make sure that that soil is nice and protected. And what that's going to do, and you can also use cardboard too, that's going to do is help lock in moisture for those root systems. It might become a barrier for those insects, and it also become a shield for that pest or weed pressure that you might experience as well. And so it's also going to help your watering last a lot longer as you're watering your plants. And then Diana made a excellent question. And you know, what too much and what not too much. So highly recommend that you mulch your transplants when you get them in, your seeds. However, wait to mulch those until they really start to develop a little bit more, until you're able to, you know, see them and they're able to get some sunlight and so on. I don't recommend mulching your lettuce mix and such because you have to come in and cut those and they're very little tiny seeds that, you know, leave a little bit more space, but you can do the area around them, but not that area where they're growing within, but you can do the area around those plants. And so,
Can I ask a quick question?
please.
What do you mean by mulch it? Because to me, that sounds like I just planted it, it's starting to germinate, and now I'm breaking up the mulch or something. I don't understand the term, sorry.
So mulch comes in different forms. It can either be wood chips, it can be leaves, it can be cardboard, or other some type of organic matter. And we're using those to be a shield for either weeds to make sure our soil isn't bare or anything like that. These are other materials that we're using to basically protect our soils. And they have so many other different benefits, like leaves, for example, when they break down, they're adding to the soil. Same thing with wood chips. You know, although they might be a little bit more woodier, longer to break down, but they're adding fungi and so on to the soil. Cardboard, it's really good at shading out weeds and so on. And such. So there's different type of mulches that you can use and whatnot. But also, you know, don't worry if you don't have mulch. You can, you know, you might experience a little bit more weeds and so on. You might see your soil drying out some, but you know, you can just stay on top of those weeds. You can even use grass clippings if you don't have access to those things, like you mow your lawn consistently or so on. You can take those leaves, those, I guess they are leaves. You can take those blades of leaves and put them on top of your plants as well. And that is a solid mulch. You just want to make sure that you aren't putting any um, grass clippings that have been treated with any type of chemicals or whatnot on top of your plants. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. I was about to break up the leaves and get rid of them, but now I'll keep them.
Keep those leaves. Oh, that is a, you know, it's basically free money, if you ask me. All right. And if you are going to do any type of, you know, amending of your soils or so on, like something a little bit more in depth, like adding, and you can still do this with compost too, but adding things like minerals or nutrients or so on, worm castings or something that takes a little bit longer to release, like a rock material or something that, you know, adds phosphorus or nitrogen or whatnot. You want to add those things or incorporate those things into your beds during the fall so that they have time to break down during the winter. Because if you put those materials that take a while for them to break down, you're really not going to see any benefits from those until, you know, later in the season or so on, because they're slow releasing. And so as you're farming, you really want to, you know, be like the work kind of, it does begin, you know, and it's happening all the time. But you know, at the end of the season, although things are starting to come to a rest, you know, that's really a time for you to get ready for the next season. So if you're, you know, if you're seeing any issues with your plants and the nutrients and they're not just looking so good, you want to look to make those, you want to look to make the address those things during the fall. Because if you see any issues with your plants, you know, it's almost too late because, you know, that's the minerals that the plant has and the plant's already growing. So anything that you do then will just be a band-aid and not really a systemic fix to whatever you're experiencing. But during the fall is really the time to take care of your plants and get ready for the next season. And as you are, continuously growing, I know there's a lot of new growers in here. You don't want to completely judge yourself just off the first season. You want to take into consideration, put years together, see how you're trending. Like 1 year, it's just your first year, so what? Second year might look a little different. Third year, you might start to get things better under your wing. And then fourth year, fifth year. So you want to treat it like not just one season. You want to look at it 5 years, 2 years, multiple years to see how you're doing. And that just comes with, putting more time into it and so on. So like, for example, my own farm, like we've been on this farm since 2018, and I'm really just starting to see, the benefits of the work we've been doing for the past year. So it's going to take some time to really see, your vegetables, your crops really respond, because it takes time within the soil for those plants to get ready. And let me see if there's anything else. And yeah, we can open this one up. Are there any questions on soil prep?
We do have a question, but it's
I
about
have a question.
soil, analyzing soil. Cindy, she asked who is analyzing our soil this year. Do you know who's analyzing the soil?
I remember a company, and
Say it again.
I don't remember the name of the company that's exactly doing the soil test,
Okay.
but once you'll see that information, who did it, who done it, and whatnot. And we also do a breakdown for you to help you understand what you're seeing and that information. But I think we can follow up and get you that who's doing the soil test, for example.
Okay. And Lisa Young, go ahead with your question. I see your hand raised.
Thank you. Are you going to test soil for raised beds as well, or just the ground level?
Well, we will do it for your raised beds if you send it to us. You just have to do it in the same manner. So when we soil test,
You're breaking up.
breaking up. So in your soil test, we give you specific instructions on testing a certain spaces within that 30 by 30 area. Generally, with a raised bed, the idea is
Breaking up a little bit. Hello.
got a little choppiness. That big?
Nope. Okay. We good.
Usually, like, you can definitely submit a soil test for your raised bed. We'll get that done for you. But generally, when people are testing their land to see if it's good to plant in, and then if it's not recommended that they plant their land or soil or whatnot, then we recommend that they use like a raised bed system where they're buying like new soil and whatnot to build that raised bed up, but they're not using the soil that's there. And then the idea with that is that the soil within that raised bed is already pretty good and pretty good to go. If you add some compost, buy some topsoil, mix that together, and that's what typically people are growing in. But you can definitely still get your raised bed soil tested.
So to hear you, thank you for that answer. But to hear you too, I can use topsoil and compost to mix it up, and I don't have to purchase or already prepared soil for the raised bed, which would be more cost effective.
Yeah. And if you do, like if you're just in a situation when it might not be ergonomic for you to, work in the field, you might need something that's a little raised up. If that's the case, like you got your soil test done on your land and the soil's good in your land, you could even take that soil, put it in your raised bed, and you're just using soil from your land. But just make sure that you find out, what's the quality of the soil that you already have.
Okay. And then question number 2, I did do the hardening process for the transplants. I haven't been able to plant them yet, but I lost several transplants. My celery didn't make it. My it was another vegetable. They just died on off.
Mhm.
So I don't know what happened.
Well, so the plants are, at least within our system, are designed to be given out and planted a week after or so distribution.
Okay.
And so we are definitely well beyond the recommended planting time for those cold crops. And so the longevity of those, the longest, depending on how well you take care of them,
Mm-hmm.
ideally you get those planted before the end of May. Those
Okay, that was the plan, but
things happen.
yep, things happen. All right, because it was my lettuce and my celery that I lost.
Aw, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but
All
thank
right.
you.
Oh yeah, no problem. So
Mm-hmm.
next up we have Penny. You have your hand raised, and I see we have another question in the chat.
Hi, yes, thank you. The soil, I've raised beds. The soil, I bought soil. So it doesn't seem to be very loose. It's called raised bed or container soil. But it's not as soft as like potting soil. So is it gonna be okay? The raised bed soil? That's what they call it.
Mhm. It's just a little bit more chunkier now.
Yeah, it's a little thicker. It's not blooming.
Well, you don't really see some perlite. It's not as fluffy and all that. So no, it's still okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for plants that are just getting started.
Okay.
It's for plants that have their root system developed, who can handle a little bit more heavier soils or whatnot. But if you were like to try and start some transplants with that soil, it would be a little bit harder for your plants to get going. So that's why you see that difference in that potting soil, or at least the starter soil. They call it so many different names. But yeah, so when you are working with those soils, just mix them both together, mix them both together, and then you got a nice, fluffy, thick, potting mix for you to work with. So if you do have access to that other soil and we call it soil, but it's not really soil, it's the perlite and the peat moss that you normally see. And those are just, the term for it would be a media. You mix that media with that soil mix that you have, because what you got is soil, it's brown, full of life and whatnot. You can mix those together, and then you got your perfect balance of starting material for your seed and whatnot.
So that's why my transplants are suffering.
Are suffering? Possibly.
Yeah.
I have seen that before when somebody started their transplants in something that was just too heavy. And too heavy being that it's harder for those root systems to develop into it just because they're baby plants and they're not used to that. They're not, it's not like a weed plant, right? You put a weed or you put some dandelion seeds in anywhere and it starts to grow. Their plants really need to be pampered.
Okay. So, they've only been in about maybe 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
But can I go back and
Oh, yeah, like
retransplant? I can. Is that a yes?
You can. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So I can take them out and put that nice soil in, and better soil, fluffier soil, and then put them back in the ground and just work on them from there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yep. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited to hear what happens after you retransplant your transplant. So, yeah. All right. Well, we have Diana. You want to go ahead with your question? It looks like you have a question about ants in your raised beds.
Right. I have little bitty ants in my raised bed. There's a lot of them. And then in my other raised bed, I have lots of worms. So I think that's good, right?
We must remember that we are growing within nature. Not, within our beds, some of the beneficial, some insects just doing their thing. Now with the ants, as long as it's within our threshold, right? So our threshold of damage. Like, are these ants just doing their thing to the side, not messing with stuff, or are they, on your plants? They're eating your plants, or at least are they disturbing you?
I don't have anything in there yet because I was
Nothing in there yet.
wanted to check first.
Gotcha. And so, as you do get plants in there, just make sure that you're paying attention to whether they're bothering your plants before you disturb that or make the decision to take them out. Now you can forego that and you can just take a shovel, dig out those ants, and be done with it. That's another recommendation.
Yeah, because right now would be the time to do that before I put anything in there.
Yeah, and it's just as simple as taking a shovel to it.
Okay, will do. Are you going to be talking about partner plants today?
Not so much companion planting.
Companion planting?
Not so much within this discussion. A little bit the scope of what I prepared.
All right.
I have a.
Okay, we have a question from Emily, and then we have a question from Cassandra. Emily, did you want to go ahead and ask that, or I can read it for you? I'll read it. We shouldn't plant herbs in raised bed, or should we plant herbs in raised bed? Is that okay to plant your herbs in like raised flower beds?
Is all okay as long as, let's just remember, our plants need nutrients, which may come from the soil or some other source. They need water, sunlight to grow. As long as we have those things, they can go wherever.
All righty. Cassandra, you can go ahead with your own question.
Hi everyone. My question is, I missed a question or the answer for the question that you guys had with the young lady with the ants in her raised garden bed. I have the same situation. I have ants, I have spiders, and all these little teeny tiny creepy crawlies all over the place. And I haven't officially planted my plants yet. I've had them inside with the grow lights because, it's been too cold. And so we're now finally getting ready to go ahead, and we're going to go ahead and put the plants out now. Should I treat that first with a little DE and then go ahead and treat add the plants? Or are those creeper crawlers, are those beneficial to my garden?
It is a sign that your soil is thriving, and it's a beautiful thing to have. We have to remember that we are growing within nature, and nature has many different actors, not only us, insects, and so on, our creepy crawlers and such. So, this is another sign of biodiversity and so much other nuances and so on. And so don't view it as a completely negative thing, although there might be some insects eating on your plants or so on. But, we have to remember that we share the harvest here. And, they help us out in other ways, like spiders, for example. Those are immensely beneficial insects. And unless you see your ants, like typically, at least on my farm, I never had an ant infestation where they're on my crop, eating the crop, and that they're usually just nesting somewhere, and they might become a bother for somebody if they step on their nest, right? So I've never seen an issue with insects, or I've never seen an issue with ants as well. And so, it's really just up to you in figuring out what's your own threshold until you need to respond to something that's happening on your farm. But I'd say, other than just, still do your thing of prepping your soil and all that, flip it, make sure that it's fluffy and whatnot. If you disturb the ants, then you disturb the ants. They'll rebound, they'll be okay. Or the spiders and all that. So still do your soil prep, don't let that get in your way of prepping your soil.
All right.
Thank you.
So we have, looks like one more question before we get into the other section. Diana, you can go ahead with your other question.
I had a question about watering. When I have both transplants and seeds in the raised bed. Like how wet do I want that soil? And when do I want to water it the most? Or I don't, trying to figure out the watering.
Yes, definitely.
So I get germination,
That's an excellent question, and we will get to that in our session of crop
You are
management.
breaking up just a little bit.
We will get into depth on that on our portion of the class focusing on maintenance of our crops. So I'll go in depth about how much you need to water your plants to ensure that plants germinate well. So I will
Okay.
let's see. Actually, what I want to do, just for chronological purposes, Naja, I'll go into the crop maintenance now,
Okay.
and I'll transition into the pest management. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
And so here we go. Let's talk about our watering. Let me make sure I get myself in the right place with my own notes since I'm moving around. So let's just we've just hardened off our transplants and it's warm enough for us to plant our seeds. We've completed our bed prep, and so we're ready for planting. It's a nice, beautiful sunny day. You want to make sure that you either before that you don't plant on a wet day. It just might be a little bit hard for you to get those plants in there. And so ideally you want to try and plant with the weather, or at least before you have a weather event happen, so you can save some money on some watering, and to help it get your plants established too and whatnot. So let's imagine we have those nice conditions for our planting to get going. And first and foremost, ideally you want to plant in a location that is ideal for you, a place where your plant is getting, excuse me, a place where your plant is getting adequate sunlight. Typically, they recommend about 8 to 16 hours of sunlight for your plants, and full sun is typically recommended. For me, I'm not too mad at having a little bit of shade for my plants because sometimes the sun can be a little bit too much for plants and burn them out quite a bit and even make you have to water a little bit more. And so I'm okay with a bit of a balance of shade and sunlight. And so if you do have a lot of shade in your backyard or so in your garden, that's a great thing because summer is going to still be super hot. And we also want to make sure that we plant our plants where we won't forget about them, someplace that's easy for you to access. I know that, I've planted plants in areas before and, forgot about them because we haven't gone out to walk over there by them. And then you look up and you're like, oh, forgot about that plant. And so you want to put it in a place that's nice and easy for you to get to. And now let's talk about watering our transplants. And so I before shared a sheet about how to properly, or our hot crop instructions that shows you how to properly plant your plants, your transplants, and your seeds, and so on. You can always go back and refer to that website, and I'll also be sharing a link for you all. And once you have your plants properly seeded, that's when your work begins, or at least once you get your plants from us, that's when your work begins. Or at least if we're really going back, work begins in the fall, maybe bed prep, but the work is always done. And so when you plant your plants in there, let's start with the transplants. What we want to make sure is that we take care of our plants on a daily basis for at least a week or so once they get planted, because they're not going to have their own root system support to go out there and get that water that's within the soil themselves. And so we need to be there daily or so, or at least when you come before you leave, and sometime in the morning, sometime in the afternoon, that we're checking on our plants, where we're watering our plants, making sure that they don't dry out within that first week. And that's going to be really important for their own development, making sure that they're able to develop their root systems and so on. And so you just want to do that for the first week. Same thing goes for your seeds. You want to make sure that, and even more so for your seeds, because they're, as they're in that germination process, if they don't have any access to water, that plant is, going to end up drying out, dying out. and so on. And so when you're starting your plants from seeds, you want to make sure that those don't dry out. And also a kind of rule that I have for that I've been sharing for at least my farmers. When you're planting a seed, don't plant it more than twice the length or twice the diameter of that seed. So if you got like a seed this size, you know, you don't want to plant it no more than this, right? Because that's kind of the size of the seed is an indicator of the strength that that seed has. And so if you have like a little tiny seed, you know, you definitely don't want to plant or have this much soil on top of it because it's going to run out of strength before it breaks that ground barrier and gets some sunlight. So as you're planting your seeds, you know, you just want to make sure that you don't plant or cover them with soil more than twice their size or twice their length. Make sure I'm using the right metric system here. But so that's just a general rule of thumb for planting seeds. And then you just want to make sure, same thing with the transplants, that you make sure that those seeds don't dry out. When I plant my carrot and beet seeds, I'm out there every single day. If it doesn't rain, out there every single day, watering those plants, giving them as much water, because water is how we control and really activate the growth of our plants. You have your water that you give your plants, which allows your plants to move and so on. And then you have the temperature, which is provided by the sunlight and even the ground in some cases. And that's gonna encourage your plants to move. You know, water is gonna give them the ability to move. The heat is gonna activate your plants, give them that encouragement to move. And then that sunlight that your plant receives will help direct all of that energy to help it grow correctly. And so the water is basically like the blood, the heat is the energy, and then the sunlight is your brain directing you for that plant in order to grow correctly. And so those are just ways that I like to break up those needs of the plants. Then your soil, of course, is the nutrients for that plant that the water gets from the soil. And so when you are properly planting your plants, that first week, make sure that you don't let them dry out. And then as that plant gets established, so let's look at next week for your transplants, you know, you can move on to watering them every other day or so, or once a week or so. Like we'll eventually be getting to a point where we can just, where we don't have to water them every single day unless it's super hot outside, right? If it's super hot, somewhere above 80 degrees air temperature, whatnot, most plants, they really start to sweat and whatnot, and that's when they're not growing or they're not producing, they're just trying to cool themselves. And so, you know, that's one thing to look out for, and that's when they will need a lot of water because we're definitely going to be hitting those hotter temperatures where things can definitely dry out. So use those tools like mulching and so on, so that you don't have to water too much and that the watering that you do has an extra effect. And so, but with your transplants, and then as you go into that week 3, you can start to water your plants, you know, once or twice a week, depending on the weather, depending on if they dried out or not, and so on. But all through that, the most important thing, if you're able to, just make sure that you're going outside and checking on your plants each day. You know, the thing that really helps your plants grow is the farmer, the gardener, and whatnot. You know, all these elements that we get, or all these elements that we're able to, you know, put on our plants, they don't really mean anything if we're not doing it in a strategic way. And so if you're not there, you know, anything can happen to your plant. They might not get water, pest, or whatnot. So just make sure that you're going out and visiting your plants at least once a day if you can. And then moving on to seeds. Now, seeds are a little bit different. They're not as developed as a transplant. We're trying to get them to the transplant stage. Seeds, you want to make sure that you continue to water those plants each and every single day, pretty much until you see the seedling break from that seed coat or break up from or come up from the ground. You want to be watering that plant every single day, making sure it doesn't dry out. And then you can start to slow down on your watering and then ultimately get to that once or twice a week watering schedule with your plants. And I really don't like to use the word watering schedule because nature doesn't have a schedule. So why would I have a schedule for a plant that I'm also planting outside? what you should get into the practice of doing is just going out there, checking on your plants, making your list of things that you need to do, and then going out there and tackling that, spread that work out the week within the week, if you're able to, and then, plan out your day or plan out your week like that. We have things that are called, for a practice that we do called a farm walk, where we walk the farm completely once a week. I'm still walking the farm every single day as the manager, and and then creating a plan for my staff for us to tackle together throughout the week. But we have a lot more to get into with individual crop maintenance. Let's see.
You want to pause for a moment for some Q&A, or you want to jump right into that?
Let's do that before I hop into like individual plants.
Okay. Yep, I see Stacy has her hand raised, so you can go ahead, Stacy, with your question.
Okay, how much water should you put on it? When is it, do you water it until it's like floating over like how much, what can you speak about? How much water do you put on the plants?
Excellent question. So when we water our plants, what you want to take into consideration, or at least try to imagine, that when you like pick up your plants, they're either in the seed or they're in a little root ball, and got the top of your plants where it's all green and whatnot. Like that's how much water that plant needs. We just need to make sure that that root ball is saturated. We just need to make sure the water is around that seed coat. Like we don't need to flood the plants. They don't need any more, any less than that. We just need to make sure that that gets nicely saturated, at least once a day, or, however long or whatnot. So as you're watering, or at least when I teach watering, but make sure that people understand that, the plants don't really need that much water depending on the size of that plant. And so let's just say, for example, you got a tree. Tree has a huge root system. Just a little bit of water is not going to do much for that tree, as it would if it was a seed. So you want to try and think within that mind frame of like, oh, this is the baby plant. It just needs a little bit of water. Oh, this is a mid-sized plant, a medium-sized amount of water for that plant. And so you can take that and go from there. But there's also a general recommendation that they give where they say you want to water your plants at least a acre inch of water, meaning that of that soil layer, let's say it's this, an inch of that, we want to be completely saturated each week. And that would, break down. So as you're watering your plants, you want to make sure if you stick your finger in the soil and you pull it back up, you want at least an inch of your finger to be completely wet. And that means that soil has been watered, because remember, we don't want to water the plant, we want to water the soil, which will release the nutrients, and your plants will get that water and use that. So, when you're doing your water checks and trying to figure out if you're doing that well, stick your finger in. If it's nice and saturated soily and whatnot, you did your job well. If it's still dry and what's after, then you might need to come back and water. And also, what I also recommend with that is that sometimes soil takes a little while to absorb water. And so if you are watering, I'd say just let down a little bit, wait for a second for it to seep down in. You can check how much you watered then. If it's not adequate, you can go back and just put some more water on and then check again. And then as you get more familiar with how much water you need to put down in your plants, then you can start to make some internal adjustments, just get used to it as you get more experience with it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? I don't see any in the chat. Anybody want to jump in and ask a question? Maybe about watering, any more watering questions? I did put some links into the chat, so if you haven't checked the chat yet, make sure you do so. All right, Penny, you can go ahead with your question.
Okay, yeah. So Do you water the plant so that the water runs through the bottom of the pot? Or you just saying just enough to have the water so that it is covering the ball, the root ball? That's all you need.
However you're putting down your water, whether it's from the bottom or from the top, you just want to make sure that the water that you're putting down is going to be adequate enough to completely saturate the root system, however the size of it, of that.
Well, I'm talking about the transplants right now. So the transplant is only, it's only down maybe a couple of inches into the dirt. So I'm saying when you water, when I was watering last year, and I think I killed everything. When I was watering last year, I would just water the plant till the water ran out the bottom of the dish, the container. So that too much water?
That means that water, that is excess.
That's excellent?
That's excess, excessive amount of water.
Oh, that's what I wondered. So what I said was just enough water to water that root ball. Okay, all right, thank you so much.
Excellent question.
All right, thank you. Now we have a question from Tish. Tish, you can go ahead and ask your question. I can
Hi.
ask it for you.
Last year, I bought a few pear trees from Home Depot, and I did not plant them last year. However, they're still in the containers. And so when is the best time to put those in the ground?
Well, I'd say get them in as soon as possible. Plants are designed to stay inside of, especially trees.
Can you repeat that, Akello? You're breaking up a little bit.
As soon as possible.
Okay, how should I amend the soil? I have like some, is regular dirt sufficient, or should I purchase something to put around the roots?
Well, planting size, so you want to make a hole that's twice the size of that root ball of that tree. And you can simply amend it by adding a mix of compost and topsoil, and that should be good enough.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great questions. Do we have any more questions from anybody? All right, you can go ahead on to your next segment.
All right, so this is now where we get into the weeds of things. We've covered getting the bed prep ready, getting the plants planted and how to cover them and protect them. Now it's time to get into the individual nuances of each of the crops that we're. So I'm going to be breaking this up into our family groups. So here we have our cucurbits. Cucurbits, the family name of our butternut winter squash, our zucchinis, our yellow squash, and so on. So these are all things within the watermelon family. And so these are some of the seeds that we have.
You're breaking up, Akello.
Talking a little low. And so with our squash plants, when we come in and plant them, the recommendation is about 2 feet apart from each plant. And what I like to do with my plants, I like to, at least my cucurbit seeds, I like to plant 2 seeds in each row. And so you don't go back and thin those, you just let those 2 seeds grow together until they're fully developed and established. Again, we have that recommendation of an acre-inch of water. And of course, remember that as your plants grow, they'll need more and more water. And so when it's just a little tiny little seed, it just needs enough to stay wet. And then as it starts to develop roots and so on, it'll just need a little bit more. They take about 3 months or so to get into maturity stage where they really start to produce their crops. And I want to go back and explain the difference between our summer squash and then our winter squash. So it's in the name. Summer squashes are going to be ready for harvest during the summer, and then your winter squashes are ready for harvest during the winter, pretty much October or so. And so our summer squashes are zucchini and yellow squashes, and those ones are freshly ready for harvest. There's not much prep that's needed. You can eat those straight off the vine if you have the taste to do that. The only thing about the the summer squashes is that when you're harvesting those, you're just harvesting them based on size. And so if you just let them grow, they'll grow, get super huge. But what will happen is the inside will start to become less palatable. It'll be a lot more seedy. You'll have like a foot-long zucchini. I've seen it before, and it doesn't taste good unless you turn that into zucchini bread, which I highly recommend. Don't just toss your plant aside just because it hasn't grown up into that, or it's past the ideal size. But the ideal range for harvesting those plants is going to be about 6 inches. So remember that for your zucchinis and your yellow squashes, if you're going to be harvesting those off. And so once those really get mature too, you'll need to start doing at least checking them once or twice a week for harvest. And when they're really in their prime, they really start to push out plants quite a bit, especially if you're giving them a lot of, the water that they need to do that. Our butternut squash and our winter squash, they're a little bit different. So you're going to be waiting, you'll be still maintaining your plant throughout those months, but you really won't be looking to harvest those until actually the plant starts to die out. So all the twigs and so on, the roots, the root systems too, the leaves will start to really dry out, and you'll just leave that plant still connected to the stem. You can see the picture of where the stem ends on this fruit, and it is a fruit because it has seeds inside. But as that plant dries out, that's going to be pretty much helping your plant last longer by locking all of that nutrients and energy inside of that plant and storing it. And so when you do harvest out your plants, you want to make sure that you leave that stem part attached to that winter squash, because if you break that off, your plant won't last, over the winter. These are plants that are designed to be storage crops. And so this right here, this mechanism of it sealing itself is how this plant lasts so long. And so once your plant completely dries out, your winter crop dries out, then you can come through and cut that plant, and then it's ready for storage or it's ready for use. And I want to backtrack a little bit. There's actually a curing process if you are looking to do some storage that you need to do. If you want your plants to last longer throughout the winter and whatnot. Pardon me. There's a curing process that needs to happen with your winter squash, where you take them, you wait until October or so on until the plant dries out. And if you just wanted to eat your crop, you can go ahead and eat your crop. But if you wanted to make it last, do this. Put it through this curing process, where you take your crop, you harvest it, and you put it in a room that is about 80 degrees if you can. And you're just going to let it sit pretty much in that warm temperature for about a week or so. And then sometime midweek, you'll flip it over on the other side, make sure that it gets, the other side is also getting some heat too. And then once that's finished, your plant is ready for storage. What that looks like for us on the farm, the hottest place in our farm is our greenhouse. And it's not heated, the heat won't be turned on in October. But we still have the sunlight, where we just let it sit inside on top of our tables in October for about a week or so. We flip it over and we let it cook. Well, it doesn't cook, but we let it get hot and whatnot. And then we are able to store that and use that too. So that process can look a little different for you. You just want to make sure that it has those conditions. Now for the There might be some things that you all need to look out for as you're growing your plants. Downy mildew, powdery mildew, these crops are really susceptible to that because they're in nature for a long time, and these are just little small spores that are blowing on your plants. It's really hard to prevent it. It's something that, naturally happens. It's not it doesn't mean that you're a bad gardener or anything like that. It's just, nature doing what nature does. It's really just a part of the whole system. So we have to learn how to grow through that. And really, many plants can still produce and grow even if they do have downy mildew. They might slow down, but that just might be another sign of just the life of the plant. And so what we can do to get around these things without having to do any amendments or whatnot, you can have a succession planting where you have multiple seeds that you get. I believe we give out about 10 seeds of each of these crops for each one. You can plant 2 of those seeds 1 week. You can plant 2 of those seeds the next week, 2 of those seeds the week after that, and then, so on and so on. And then you have a 5-week succession of zucchini or whatever, what have you. For the butternut winter squash, that might look a little bit different because that's a crop you harvest all at once. At the end of the year, the zucchini and the yellow squash, you're harvesting those multiple times until they're done. And so this is the practice for those summer squashes. But what you're doing, what we normally see, those older plants really start to become susceptible to those fungi, those insects and whatnot. And so space out your planting of those crops, and you'll literally see the pest pressure or the disease pressure of those plants move from the older ones to the younger ones, if you do have that issue. But you'll see that, the older ones might stop, but the younger ones are still producing. Now, there are things that you can do to help protect your plants. They're from at least the spores and whatnot. And remember that the spores are present, you can't see them, but the powdery mildew and such that you see, that's a sign that the spores are spreading. So that's the spores reproducing that you're seeing. If you just see your leaf, that doesn't mean that it's not present. It just means it hasn't started to reproduce. If you see the spores and the gray spots on your plant, that means that it's sending out spores active. All right. And so when you do come in and apply your amendment for that spore, for that plant, you need to do that before you even see anything. You have to assume that it's present because it's basically invisible to the human eye. And so there are a couple things that you can do. So you can put a mix of milk. You can do a milk spray on top of your soil of 40% milk, 60% water. You can spray your plants once a week or so. And really, that's the key part about all of this. Like, these are just one-off things that you can do. If you, miss, or if you're not consistent, then, something else will be consistent on your plants, right? There's also other things that you can try. Baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon to about 16 ounces of water. You can use that and spray on top of your plants to help keep off that powdery mildew. And also, this is, it's not just for squash plants that you can do. If you have powdery mildew or downy mildew or whatnot, any type of fungus, you can use these things on those too. This isn't just for your squash. There's also neem oil that you can use. Neem oil is also used for keeping pest pressure of diseases down. It's also used for pest insects too. And when I say pest breaks down into the animals, the insects, the diseases, the fungi. Pest incorporates all those in the term. But when you're using neem oil, you want to make sure that you emulsify it. Neem oil is an oil. If you put it with water, it'll eventually separate. And that might be why you see it fail on your plants. So to emulsify it, you just mix the neem oil with some soap. And then you can, once that's mixed well together, then you can add some water and use it as a spray. Now, when you are using neem oil, or really any of these practices, what you want to do the next day, you don't want that to stay on your plants the entire time because it might clog up the pores of your plants. You want to come through the next day and rinse your plants off, especially for that neem oil because it's nice and oily. It really gets in a lot of places. So you want to make sure you don't put too much. You want to make sure that doesn't stay on too long on your plants. All right, and we haven't. I might have to skip a little bit to talk about the pest of these. And I have to go back to this the PowerPoint, and that's a picture of the powdery mildew on some squash plants. The recipe for the neem oil is.
Hello. Before you move on, do you mind repeating the recipe for, is that the neem oil recipe,
I'll go
Diana,
back
you're
to it.
looking for?
I can do both. So the baking soda, that's going to be 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda to 16 ounces of water. For the neem oil, to get it emulsified, you want to mix 2 parts neem to 1 part liquid soap. You can do like a natural soap, something like Dr. Bronner's is a good one. Just make sure that it's not a harmful chemical. So a natural derived soap would be best. And then you can mix your water with that and however much water you need to get the consistency you want. The spelling of the neem oil, it's NEEM oil. All right. And so here's just
What about the milk one?
the milk recipe. So that's going to be 40% milk, 60% water.
Thank you.
And try them all out, see how they work. These are, well, minus the neem oil, a lot of these things are commonly found around the household. And I don't know if there's a particular type of milk that you need to use. So I assume cow's milk would suffice. Let's see. This is also another thing. Well, we'll talk about the pest of the cucumbers. So the most common pest that you'll see on your cucurbits will be the cucumber beetle. Right here that you see, there's a spotted one, there's a striped one. They do the exact same thing. And then there's the squash beetle. And so with these, they typically, they can overwinter inside the roots of your crops if you see them. So they can overwinter within the roots. And then they also fly in each year. These are bugs that fly. Before we begin to start to address pest pressure and whatnot, it's important that we know the different life stages of our plants. And by understanding the different life stages from larvae to pupae to, the adult and whatever else is in between based on the insect, we will be able to figure out, when's it best to address that plant or that insect. And so if we imagine this one is flying, it might be kind of hard to manage that insect if it's just flying around. It might be hard to catch. But if we look at it when it's a egg form or a larvae, it's not really moving anywhere. It's stationary for the most part. That should be when we address that pest before it becomes harder to deal with. And so one of the ways that we can do that and deter them, we can use some isolation. Excuse me. You can put up a barrier on your plants just to keep them out from flying into them. You can use a practice of doing a crop rotation where, typically insects, they learn where things were last year, at least they plant their eggs where the food was so that they don't have to go far to look for. And so you can move your crops to a different space within the garden and try that practice out. go into. All right, we have a whole pest bed. One thing that you can also do is try to keep your beds covered. There's a lot of insects. They just come from the ground, and so you can cover up that area to make sure that they're not able to burrow out of there. Another thing is isolation, covering up your plants, keeping those. Spraying consistently using things like neem oil or safe spray. And then, of course, good old hand picking is always good for your insects as well. And also make sure that you keep your beds weeded. Weeds can also attract those pests as well. And there are some more specific things, like specifically for your cucurbits. This right here is called Kowloon clay. They put this on top of, well, they dunk the squash plant inside of here, and then it's left with this powdery stuff on top of your plants. But this powder is microscopically, it's dangerous to those insects. And so if they problem that or whatnot, it's going to be damaging that exoskeleton of that pest. And so this is another way or specific way, it's kind of like diatomaceous earth, which is used for flea beetles and whatnot, that you can use on top of your plants. The recipe for this one, it's pretty much very simple. You want to make sure, it's kind of opaque here, but I'd say you just want to make sure that as you're using it, that you just have, somewhat of a light layer on top of your plants. I don't have a specific recipe for this one, but it's basically just add water. It comes as a powder form, and I highly recommend it. It also has other benefits of cooling down your plants. It's kind of like a bit of a clay or a little bit of a sunscreen, if you will, for your plants. And I want to go back a bit to our other cucurbits. The Kowloon clay, I believe it's spelled Khaolin. You can find that on Amazon. It's basically wood ash from a specific type of wood. And it's just a powder that you can mix with water and spray on your plants. Wait. All right. Let's see, we have some more cucurbits, watermelons. We also have, this year we're doing watermelon and a melon. The recommendation in that spacing is 18 inches to 2 feet. And pretty much the same management. Thank you. And pretty much the same management as your other cucurbits in that family. The only difference is that with the harvesting of these, you want to make sure that, there's so many methods with harvesting your melons. You got the bumping, you got the looking at color and all of this, and slapping it, seeing how that happens. The way how to tell exactly how your plants are looking is by following where that stem comes out of that watermelon. And then if you keep on looking, there should be a little bit of a thread or such that is twirled up on that plant. And that starts off green, but as that watermelon matures, it starts to brown. And so once that becomes completely brown, that means that that watermelon is ready for harvest. So you don't have to do the slapping method, the thumping, looking at the green. You just need to look at what that thread, that little stem is doing, if it's brown, green, or not. And if you wanted to harvest your watermelon a little bit early, say you're selling it or whatnot, not selling it ready, letting it get a little bit more mature, you could harvest it at a different stage and let it finish or whatnot. But if you wanted to have like a fresh, ready for eating watermelon, harvest your watermelons when that stem is brown. Right. All right, we have a lot to cover with our individual breakdown. All right, I'm going to try and speed it up, make sure that we get everything in here. I'll be mostly pointing out or things to highlight with our plants. So beans, they're very simple, straightforward. We have a pole bean, which ideally is trellis because those beans like to climb up. And then we have a bush bean, which doesn't need to supportive trellis. And really the thing to know about your beans, they're very easy crop to get if you water them consistently, or when they need to be watered. The only thing to know about them, well, not the only thing to know about them, but the most important thing, when you go in to harvest your beans, pay attention to the different stages that that pod is at. And so when you first go in and harvest or look at it, it starts off really thin. And if you leave it on the vine, it starts to develop its little pods. And so if you start to see that it's ribbed, like where those pod seeds form, if it becomes ribbed like that, it's less palatable for you. And I also invite you to taste your plants at different stages, or taste that fruit of that plant at different stages of its development, so that you can know personally what that's like. Like, for example, if you taste a tomato when it's green, or if you're just getting more experience with it, taste that tomato when it's green, taste it when it's red, taste it when it's greenish red, and so on, just so that you can know and start to develop that taste and sight connection with that plant. But if you taste that plant when it's too small, then you're really not going to have that much flavor with it. But if you get it right before it starts to get the pod, when you get that pod or eat that pod right before it starts to get ribbed, that's the perfect, or at least the ideal time to harvest your plants. And so you don't necessarily need to be told, oh, it needs to be 6 inches or so on. You can figure that out yourself. As a grower, I just simply going out there, harvesting your plant, testing it out at different stages, figuring out, what's ideal for you. I'll also add, if you are doing something like a dry bean, like if you wanted to have some black eyed peas for seed saving or whatnot, or have some black eyed pea soup, what you would do then is not harvest those beans. You would just leave them on the vine until the end of the season, until those pods start to dry out, turn brown. Once they're completely brown and crackling and hard and whatnot, that means that seed pod has completely dried out. And then from there, you harvest those, and then you pretty much just have to dehusk them, remove that coat from those seeds. And then once you do that, you basically have dry beans that you can use over the winter. So these, you can harvest them as fresh, or you can harvest them as dry. It just takes a little bit of a longer process to do them dry. Our flowers, super straightforward. Just make sure that you consistently water those, and those germinate without issue. Ones here that are notable, the marigolds are good at being a pest deterrent from things like aphids and so on. The sunflowers are also edible as well if you let those grow out and such. But overall, really straightforward flowers and the pretty flowers. All right, we're getting into the big ones. And we have about 30 minutes left, so lots of crops. So the majority of what we offer is a lot of plants within the nightshade family. So you have your peppers, eggplants, your solanum crops, and such, your peppers, eggplants, and tomatoes. A lot of these crops have the same type of leaf system, some similar growing habits and whatnot, but they really make up a lot of our crop transplants. And let's see which one we will be discussing first. All right, so we have our tomatoes. Tomatoes, the recommended spacing for these is 2 inches apart. And it is also recommended that you support these with some type of trellis, because as they grow up and develop their fruits, the tomatoes that we don't love, they will get heavier and heavier. And so you want to make sure that you support those plants as much as you can, so that that tomato plant doesn't lean over. It is a vining crop. And it will flop over quite easily. And for farm food safety, you want to make sure that those tomato plants don't touch the ground. And I also note that we want to make sure that, we give our plants enough height. The tomatoes that we have in our distribution are indeterminate tomatoes, meaning that they'll just grow and grow and grow if you give them enough nutrients and support. I don't think we have any determinate tomatoes, meaning that they all just grow to a certain height and they stop growing and start producing tomato plants. And let's see if we can stay tomatoes. Yes. So supporting our tomato plants, this right here is just a picture of some basket weaving on top where you crisscross a line through your tomatoes at different heights of the plants. You can do it nice and beautiful like this, or you can have multiple rows of your plants. You're basically just crisscrossing those in between. Or you can use a stem system for your plants, where you just put a stem or a stake right next to your plant and then tie a string next to those and support them. And here's just another picture of some type of trellising. Now with your tomato plants, to control the growth of them, because these are vines and they will start to become more vegetative if you don't manage their growth, meaning that they'll just grow more plant than actual fruit if you let them go. So to encourage more fruit production, we sucker our plants, meaning that we take off this part here that kind of grows in the armpit of your tomatoes. So as your tomato plant naturally grows, it has a leader that's guiding your plant, the dominant stem. And the suckers are also other potential leaders. They're more stems basically. And they can also have fruit that come to grow off them and whatnot. But if you let too many of those grow, you'll just have a bush. And so you want to sucker those specifically or with some intention. And so there are some leader systems that you can use. There's a 1 leader system and you just have one main stem. And you don't let any suckers grow. Or you can do a 2 leader system where you let 1 sucker grow and you keep your leader, and then you end up having 2 leaders that you are keeping and you're suckering the rest. Or you can have, a 3 sucker system. I haven't seen that one in practice. I've only seen a 2 and a 3, or excuse me, a 2 and a 1. You let 3 suckers go. And so it's really up to you in your practice, or you can, let your tomatoes go and you can get your tomatoes and you can just, come in and thin them every now and then. But that way is really going to encourage more fruit production. And again, this is just one of my other ideas of testing out your fruits at different stages in their maturity. So we know that the red ones, at least for those red tomatoes, are ideally where we know that the plant is going to be ripe, but you can still try and see what that tomato is like at different stages. And then the leader, that just means just the stem. So going back a little bit, let's talk eggplants. So eggplants, very straightforward solanum crop, recommended spacing 18 to 2 feet, or 18 inches to 2 feet for those ones. And we like to plant those in rows 3 inches apart. With eggplants, they do get a lot of pressure from flea beetles. And so I recommend covering those up just to deter those pests from getting on those plants. Flea beetles, they look like little dots, and if you touch the leaf, they look like black dots on the leaves of your plants. And if you touch them, you can see them kind of pop off and hop into the next thing. But here's a picture of a eggplant when it's ready for harvest. Oh, and I also recommend that you support your eggplant with stakes. Sometimes the fruit can get really heavy. The plant typically does support itself, but sometimes it might need a little bit of help if it has issues with its development. So you can also do a trellis system, just like the tomatoes for your eggplants. And so when you are going or ready to harvest your eggplants, what you want to look at is not the color of the eggplant. Eggplants come in all different shapes and colors. What you want to look for is the hue of the eggplant. So this right here, this little shine that we're seeing, this reflection, if it's not ready for harvest, this reflection is going to be clear and you can literally see yourself like a reflection. But when your eggplant is ready for harvest, just like this picture, it's going to be blurry. How this one is a little bit more opaque and stuff where you can't really see your reflection. And so that's going to be your main sign, along with size, you know, once this is of size that you like it, you can harvest your eggplant. But you want to look at that hue. So when you harvest your eggplant, you want to hold it up to the sun, see how that reflects on it. If it's clear, plasticky looking, it's not ready. But if it's nice and opaque, can't really see anything else in there, it's ready for harvest. And you can, this one right here, this eggplant that's been cut up, this one is a little past. You can see that the seeds are a little bit more prevalent. So that means that the eggplant might be a little bit more spongy, a little bit more crunchy. And so we want our eggplants to be generally seedless, and so on when we go in and harvest them, unless that's what you prefer. Like this eggplant is still good to eat, but it's a little bit past. But if you did want to do some seed saving, you can let your eggplants get a little bit more mature on that vine, and then you can come through and harvest your seeds. And then we'll talk about peppers. So peppers, recommended spacing for those is 18 inches. We have all different types of peppers, hot peppers, bell peppers, roasting peppers, and so on. But generally, their practice is the same. I do recommend supporting those with stakes. And also, if you do have the ability, planting them in an area that's not too sunny. So sometimes the fruit of a pepper plant can get sunburned. And if that just means that the canopy of that pepper plant didn't really develop enough to completely protect that plant from the sun. And so, you know, that just might be a sign that, oh, we need to, you know, encourage a little bit more canopy development on that plant. Or you might need to support it with some shade cloth or some type of sheet or whatnot. And so I also recommend supporting that with the trellis. Sometimes peppers can get a little bit heavy. And then as you're growing your plant, there can also be some things that you see. So this right here on the top is called blossom end rot. When your plant is either experiencing an imbalance between calcium and magnesium, or it's getting irregularly watered. And so this is like one of the main things that we see with our tomatoes and peppers. And how to handle this, well, if you see it, you know, sometimes it's almost too late to handle it because, you know, these things take time to break down and whatnot. There's no like switch or such that you can do within your practice right then and there. It's a long-going practice of fixing such issues. But one thing that you can do is manage or change how you water your plants. Sometimes plants can be getting irregularly watered, meaning that they're not just getting water when they need it. They might be getting water when they don't need it. And so what you should do is try to pay attention a little bit more to how and how much you water your plants and when you water your plants. What's the variance between that? Just make sure you get a little bit more consistent just to keep that plant, you know, getting water when it needs it. And then come during the fall or winter, you can add something like gypsum to your soil, which adds more calcium to it and such. Moving now to when your pepper plant is ready to harvest. So when you go in and look at your pepper plant, you're not going to go off like how many, you know, bulges it has or anything like that. So typically for like your bell peppers and your roasting peppers, I'm going to just go through and squeeze your pepper just a little bit. And what you should hear is a little bit of a crack. If you squeeze it and it's squishy, no cracking sound, that means that it's not ripe yet. And so you want a nice firm pepper that you can hear a little bit of a crack in. That's a sign that your sweet pepper such is ready for harvest. So now when it's squishy, when you squeeze it, when it's thick, firm, and it's cracking to the squeeze. For hot peppers, like your jalapenos or so on, like this picture right here in the center, there's something called checking, and that's this little white streak right here. That's a sign that your plant is ready for harvest. And you can even see it on the green one here. Like normally you might harvest that pepper when it's red, but what that the color indicates, or at least for peppers, for a hot pepper, when it turns red or yellow, that's an indication of it, how hot it is. A green pepper, not as hot as a red pepper. For a bell pepper, a sweet pepper, when it changes color, that's an indication of how sweet it is, not the maturity of the fruit. The indication for the maturity is going to be that checking, and if it's cracking to the rip of that plant. Here's just a picture of what a past eggplant looks and a past cucumber. It's just very similar to the zucchini and the yellow squash. The ideal time to harvest a cucumber will be about 6 inches. And this is just a picture of a past cucumber that's turned yellow. Let's see what's next. Yeah, some pests. The tomato hornworm, that's a common one that's found on tomatoes. It's really simple to keep in check. What you want to do when you're identifying pests, you want to look for the damage first. In most cases, you're not going to see that pest first. You're going to see the damage, holes in your leaves, parts of the plants eaten up. And then you just want to follow that damage where it's at, because that insect might still be close. You know, they're not going to go too far away from their food. And so you can simply hand pick this, put it in the bucket, and leave it out for the chickens or the birds. Very simple pest to take care of. And then our flea beetles, you want to use some isolation from those. Here's just a picture of them. They really eat up your plant. They affect how well your plant can absorb sunlight and the ability for it to get and produce sugar. Oh, pardon me. And isolation is the best way to take care of these. You can also use the diatomaceous earth. It's a powder that is harmful to the exoskeletons of insects. You can put a powder of that on top of the leaves. Just make sure that you do that when it's not going to rain, so that can be more effective. But in some cases, your plants can also outgrow the damage of this type of pest too, as long as it's not too bad. Aphids, another common generalist, found on many types of plants. You can use neem oil, a spray called Safe. And you can also use water, taking a water hose and just blasting wherever those aphids are. They're very lethargic and slow plants or slow insects. And so you just simply blast those ones off. And yeah, that's just some of the more detailed information. Some natural predators, we're talking about spiders and so on, birds. So these are just pests that they wouldn't be considered pests, but beneficial insects that you should get to learn around your garden so that you can, more so understand what's happening, what's going on, and be able to react accordingly to what you see within your garden. Like ladybugs, not the ladybugs that we normally commonly see with the shell and spots, but their larvae, love aphids. And so if you see ladybugs, not necessarily an indicator that, your aphids are being eaten, they might be adults at that time, or they are adults at that time, but you want those ladybugs to be juveniles in their larvae stage where they just eat aphids. All right. some of our herbs. So parsley, another straight, simple herb that we give out. Most important about this one, just make sure that before you start to harvest from your plant that you allow it to get into its adult stage. So give it about a month or so and let it get real bushy before you start to harvest from that plant. And if you do need to harvest from it between then, just make sure that you start off small and then progressively, increase how much you're harvesting from that plant because it's still, that's how it grows and whatnot. If you take away all the leaves, it'll be hard for that plant to grow. Parsley also overwinters, and so you can, have parsley again next year. Our basil is another easy herb. The only thing to note about this plant, particularly, is that when you go through and harvest it, it will have different nodes. And so when you go and harvest, you want to make sure that you harvest in between the nodes where the leaves start to shoot out. You want to harvest in between there. And what that's going to do is encourage the plant to shoot out other new stems to start to grow and become leaves. And then another thing you want to pay attention to your basil is you want to prevent it from flowering. When basil goes to flower, it starts to focus more so on the production of the leaves, or excuse me, the production of the seed. And so if you see the flower start to produce at the tip of the stem, just come through and pick that flower off, and then you can prolong or halt that seeding process of that basil. And also another interesting tip, the seeds of the basil are also edible. Chefs use them. They're very quite interesting. If you ever seen a basil seed get wet, it starts to soak up that water and become a little bit gelatinous in the seed coat around it. So that's another interesting thing. All right, and these are just herbs that we don't have currently, but we do. Last year we did tarragon. This year we're doing thyme as an herb that we're going to be distributing, so that will be nice and fun. Very similar harvest method to parsley. Just let that plant grow out a little bit before you start to harvest from it. Seed show. This year we're doing Malokia, Egyptian spinach. And with this plant, if you do pick up this plant, to get it to germinate properly, what you want to do is soak that seed for about a day or so before you plant it. And then you can plant it and care for it like you typically would for a regular plant. There are some other instructions that you might find on pre-soaking those seeds. Some of them say boil them in hot water. I'd say let's keep it simple and just put them in room temperature water. Let them sit for a day or so or overnight. And then you can plant that seed regularly and have that germinate and become that plant. Then from there, it's very much similar to how you would harvest from a spinach plant. And let's see if there are other crops that we've missed. All right, wait for clicking. We have, and I'm gonna make sure that we save at least 10 minutes just for questions for you all. Ground cherries are another transplant that we're giving out. That's a really straightforward crop. The fruit of that plant, once the canopy starts to develop, the fruit of that plant is going to come out in pods, and it's not going to be ready for harvest just then. You want to make sure that that pod dries out, and so that plant will start off as green, and then it will gradually turn into a nice bright orange or a dull orange, excuse me. And then that's ready for harvest. And what I really highly recommend is that you try tasting that plant at different phases during its yellowing stage, because it's sometimes it might be sweet, sometimes it might be sour. And so just that you can get more familiar with when to consistently harvest that plant. Try it out, taste it out. All right, I think we need to open it up for some questions before we Right.
All right, thank you. You crammed a lot in there. That was a lot of information, and we got all that. That was awesome. You did a great job. You made it. So we do have a few questions. Per Anika, hopefully I'm saying that right. Per Anika, she was asking, what did you say about planting the watermelons? How long deep should you plant the watermelon?
Oh, when you're planting your transplants, like when you get them from us, just plant them as deep as that root ball is. You don't need to dig hole, a big hole or anything. Whatever that root ball size is, make sure that's under the ground.
Okay, great. Okay, and Marguerite, you
Yeah, I
can go
just want to, okay, what was the last plant or vegetable you talked about? You said try it out. It goes from changes colors.
The ground is-
Oh, ground cherry. Okay.
I pointed that out because when we typically see it at the
We
market.
can't hear you.
I pointed that out because at the market you might see it in different consistencies of color, and that
Mhm.
color indicates the difference in taste. And so if you have it on your farm, taste it out and see what phase of that color you like it at. Because it could be
Oh,
sweet,
okay.
it could be sour, and then you can get more consistent for your.
Okay, thank you.
The flowers on the kale. So Matt, that means that if your kale is starting to flower in the first year, that means it might be experiencing some stress. So check on your waterings, check if there's any pest pressure. Another indication, if you've overwintered that kale, because kales are a biennial, meaning that they need to go through a winter before they start to seed. That just means that your plant is, going through the natural phases. And also the flowers of the kale are edible, something called rob, where you can just come through and cut that. It's really tasty. If you get them at an early stage in their development, you can like eat that part. Like as you're pruning it back, you can eat that flower of the kale. You can saute it. It's really delicious if you get it at the right time.
Awesome. Great tips. Do we have any more questions? Anybody else have questions about their hot crops? You are getting your hot crops soon, so you got to be prepared. No more questions. All right, Akelo, did you want to end with
I have one.
anything?
I'm
Oh, you
sorry.
have one? Go right ahead.
Yes. My kale started growing back again from last year, and like in one of those 5-gallon cloth pots. And I noticed that the flowers are there now, so I can just prune off the flowers and not destroy the whole plant, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Flowers are going to continue to grow, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. All right, anything else? Oh, go ahead, Cassandra.
I just have one quick question for you. Are the basilicas, are those can those plants be, do they need the bees? Do they need the what do you call them? Oh my goodness, pollinators to pollinate? Is it necessary? Can I put a cover over those, or can I put them all together and put a cover over them
Plants here
and
are,
not have to worry about the pollinators for those particular plants?
don't have to worry about any pollinators with these plants. They are self-pollinating. Bees might still get on them and whatnot.
Your voice went away.
Yeah, it's
The,
Partly.
these plants are self-pollinating, meaning that they don't need any insects to help them fruit. And so you can cover them up as much as you like.
okay. Thank you so much.
All righty. Well, if you haven't checked the chats yet, make sure you check the chats because I did put a few links in there. Some about the pests and diseases Akello mentioned hot crop instruction. There's a plan for your garden. That's the family garden and the community garden. So if you haven't checked the chats yet, make sure you do so. Click on those links, download those instructions. If we don't have any more questions, if you do have questions you want to ask offline, I'll drop my email and Akello's email into the chat as well. And you can copy that from there. And anything else we can do for you all, just email us.
I wanted to find out if you're gonna give instructions as to how you're doing your potatoes and sweet potatoes.
Yes.
So that's gonna be on the paperwork that we pick up.
Yep, you're muted, Akello.
Can't hear you.
So those instructions for the sweet potatoes going out
Say that one more time. You're breaking up, Akello.
will be going out when we do our sweet potato distribution.
Okay.
Oh, you're going away. We can't hear you. You're back up away from your
Well,
screen.
I heard that you're gonna have it when we pick it up. Okay.
We'll have it when we pick it up. And
Okay.
yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay.
Oh, I have one
Oh,
more
yeah, go
question.
ahead. Mhm.
I do a lot of container planting, and some people say I should dump my dirt all out, but in the past, I just take maybe half of it out. What's the proper way?
That's it right there.
I'm sorry.
That's it right there. Just taking half, replenish it with compost.
Oh, okay. Because I would just take half and then pour some good in there and stir it up and water it and do my thing. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Enjoy your evening. Enjoy your hot crops. I hope you are there. Get there early. Don't want anybody to miss out on anything. We do run out of stuff, so if you want everything, make sure you come that first day. So we will see you next week for hot crop distribution.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Everybody have a good night.
Good night.
All right.